Next, we're going to create our virtual private network. So we're going to go to the hamburger and go down to VPC network, and you'll go to VPC networks. You may get this error message when you get here. You're just going to click on continue, and it's going to redirect you to the page to enable the Compute Engine API. So once you enable this, it should allow you to access creating virtual machines and creating virtual networks. So we'll just wait for this to load. So once it finishes, you should now see your dashboard for virtual private networks. So we are going to create a new virtual private network. So I'm going to click the plus at the top to create a new network. I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call mine iTax-5217, keeping it consistent. I'm going to go to a little description. All right, and that under here we have to create at least one subnet. Now if you look at the diagram for the lab, we're going to have two subnets, a DMZ and a private. The DMZ is going to be 10.10.10.0 and the private is going to be 10.20.20.20. So we're going to create those two networks. I'm going to start with DMZ. Give it a little description. You don't have to do that. Now this is important when you get to the region. Your regions have to be consistent. So all the machines that you create, you're going to have to select the same region. So I'm on the east of the US, so I could do US East 1. I'm just going to use US Central 1 because that seems to always be the default in Google, so it's just easier. So again, you're going to select a region. I'm going to select US Central 1. Just make a note of which region you use. You're going to have to be consistent in that as you go forward. For the IP range, for my first subnet, it's going to be 10.10.10.0/24. I don't need a secondary. I don't need flow logs or any of these other things. We're not going to need any of these IPv4 firewall rules. I shouldn't really have any here. And then I believe that's all we're going to need. So we're going to go ahead and create our virtual private network. So you'll get this screen while it's creating the network, and once this is done, we'll be able to click on it and we'll be able to take a look at our subnets, and then we'll create our next subnet. Okay, the virtual private network's been created. It has one subnet, as you can see here, and it has no firewall rules, which is what we want. So I'm going to click on my new subnet, or my new network rather. I'm going to come over here to subnets. I can see my DMZ. I'm going to click add subnet, and now we're going to add the private network. Now, if you recall, we want to make sure we keep the regions consistent. So I'm going to use US Central 1, make sure they're all the same. My range for this network is going to be 10.20.20.0/24. And again, the rest of this we can just leave as the default, and that should create our next network. So now that we have our two networks, the DMZ and the private network, we've got the right IP addresses. By default, the firewall is going to block all traffic, regardless of where it's going, where it's coming from. Everything's going to be blocked. So what we want to start out with is some very liberal firewall rules so that we can at least get everything up and running. And then we're going to lock down the environment. I know the only two ports I'm going to need for doing my testing before we start locking it down is going to be port 80 and 22. So we're going to start by opening 80 and 22 on both of these networks to everything. So to do that, we're going to add a firewall rule. And I'm going to call this allow all SSH HTTP, because there's only two that I really need. And this rule should be deleted in production. So once we go to production, we're going to make sure we turn this rule off. So we're going to set this so that all traffic coming in is going to be allowed, and instead of doing specified targets, we're going to do all instances on the network, and we're going to do from anywhere, so /0. So traffic coming from anywhere, that's what this means. 0000/0 means I don't care where it came from. And for the IPv4 ranges where it's going, we're going to do 10.10.10.0/24. So that's going to be our first subnet. and then this is going to be our second subnet. So this is going to allow all traffic to both subnets. Now I could select allow all here, but I know I only really need 80 and 22. So I just want to do the traffic I need. I don't really need any other traffic. Now I'm also going to allow 3306, which is SQL, but I'm going to do that with a separate rule because it's kind of dangerous to leave that open. You're going to see why later. So we're going to do 80 and 22 from anywhere to either one of these subnets, and that's pretty much it. Oh, I have to give it a better name, sorry. So it's going to be SSH, actually I'll call it all SSH HTTP. And I'm going to put a temp on the end here. So I remember that I have to delete this later. Alright, so we'll create that firewall rule. Now we're going to take one more look at our network diagram. I have these two servers sitting in the private subnet. And in theory, since this is a private subnet, I can allow traffic on this network regardless of where it came from, where it's going, as long as it's internal to this network. So I'm going to create a firewall rule that just allows everything internal to this private network because it's all inside this dotted line, right? So I'm not too concerned about it. So I'm going to go back to my firewall rules. We're going to create a new firewall rule. And we're going to do private internal. Alright, and then down here, basically I'm going to turn off my targets for the source if it's coming from anywhere in 10.20.20.0/24, and it's going to anything on 10.20.20.0/24. So from anywhere in my private subnet to anywhere in my private subnet, I don't care what port it is, I'm just going to allow everything. So I'm going to create that rule. So now I have one rule that's going to allow all the traffic internal to the private network, and then another rule that's going to allow all traffic on either port 80 or 22 to come into either one of these networks. And again, this is going to be temporary. We're going to remove that rule once we have everything working in our virtual network. So now we've created our network environment. We have everything ready to go. Now we're going to start working on our virtual machines.